Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we're going to start this Yevamot daf Nun Aleph. We are going to begin on the very bottom of daf Nun Amid Beis. Amar Rabbi, as we continue to Nun Aleph Amid Aleph, my time to Gamliel. What is the reason of Rabbi Gamliel? So we had a machlokas in the Mishnah, which was just on daf Nun, last daf. According to Rabbi Gamliel, he says, Ein get acher get. However, the Rabbanan say that there is get after another get. What is this referring to? So as we discussed at length in yesterday's Mishnah, imagining that you have, for example, three brothers, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Levi died and left two wives, Rachel and Leah, as Yevamos. Reuven takes the first action and gives Rachel a get. So according to Rabbi Gamliel, once that first action takes place, Shimon, if he decides to give a get to Leah, or for that matter, let's say Reuven decides to give a get to Leah after he had already given a get to Rachel, in that situation, we do not say that that get has any power, the second one. Therefore, the fact that, again, going back to, let's say, Shimon, the second brother who gave the second get, means nothing, and therefore Shimon can still marry Leah's relatives. Or again, if Reuven gave a get to Rachel and then Reuven gave a get to Leah, so still that second get that Reuven gave to Leah means nothing, and he can marry her relatives. So too when it comes to Mimer, if instead of Reuven giving a get and Shimon giving a get, Reuven did Mimer and then Shimon did Mimer, so we said that the Mimer that Reuven gave connects him to Rachel, and therefore what Shimon does afterwards is immaterial. If he gives and does Mimer to Leah, that doesn't mean anything. It has no validity. However, according to the opinion of the Chachamim said, Yesh get acher get, V'yesh Mimer acher Mimer. As we're going to see again later on in this stuff, that's going to end up meaning that there'll be a machlokas whether Shimon is mutter in her relatives. So the question is, why does Rabbi Gamliel say that there's the second get means nothing and the second mimer means nothing? So in the Havamina, the Gemara says as follows: the Masaf Galei, because Rabbi Gamliel actually is in doubt when it comes to a get, not a normal get, but a get giving a get to a Yevama, in which typically you're supposed to either do Yibum or Chalitza. So the fact that you gave a get, he's not sure, idachi ilo dachi, whether or not that actually pushes off or doesn't push off. He doesn't understand, is not sure exactly that if that really has power. So too when it comes to Mimer, ikani ilo kani. He's not sure, because you're really supposed to do Yibum, if Mimer, which is a kedushin to Rabbanan for a typical kedushin, so kedushin is for normal. So Mimer is kedushin kesef, but to a Yevama. So in that situation, he's not sure if that actually works. So therefore he says like this: get idachi udachi. So does it work or does it not work? But mamarashach ikamadachi basar my ka'avid. If the first one was pushed off, then the second one did nothing, right? In other words, the get really pushed her off, that it has some validity, then the second one means nothing. If the first one didn't do anything, then the second one didn't do anything. So it's a mamanavshach. If it works for the first, then that's it. Then the second one's get means nothing. If the first person who gave the get didn't do anything, then the second person who gave a get also doesn't do anything. So therefore it must be that that's the reason why he says, therefore, if you gave a get, mamanavshach, the second get's not going to be worth anything. Mimer ikani ilokani, and he also has a suffix when it comes to mimer, because ikama kani, if let's say he actually was able to, when Reuven did mimer, who's kind of her, so basar my ka'avid, then that's it. Then the second one who did mimer has no ability to do mimer afterwards, because there was some action done to one of these Yevamos, and once there was a correct action that was done, so then all the other women are free. Now, v'ikamu lo kani, if the mimer did nothing, so basar nami lo kani, then the second mimer didn't do anything either. So the second mimer can't have any validity, either because mimer doesn't do anything at all for the first one, so that won't work for the second. And if it does work for the first one, then that'll free her off, and therefore mimer cannot be done. So basically, that's the reason why he says ein get achar get in mimer achar mimer. Gemara is not satisfied with this. Esvei. So Esvei Abai. So he asks a question. Because we find that Rabbi Gamliel actually agrees and admits in the following cases: Shish get achar mimer, mimer achar get. What does that mean? So let's say you have Reuven and Shimon. Shimon dies, and he leaves two wives, Rachel and Leah. So what Reuven does is he does, in either order, he first gives mimer to Rachel and then gives a get to Leah, or vice versa. He first gives, let's say, Rachel the get, and then he does mimer to Leah. So if those are the things that he did, so we're going to see, he says that it is effective. The question is, why is it effective? Based on this whole notion that he's not sure if get or mimer works, so then therefore the second one is not necessary, has no validity, doesn't mean anything, as we just established. So then it shouldn't matter if it's get after get, mimer after mimer, or even if it's get and mimer, get and then mimer, or mimer after get, should be the same thing. But he doesn't say that. He says that it's only if they're get and get, mimer and mimer, that the second action is nothing, has no meaning. But if it was a get then mimer, mimer, get, no. He says that actually does mean something, which means that does have the power to aser him to this other woman's relatives. Reuven will be aser not only to Rachel but also to Leah. So that's one question. And then he continues like this. Again, get achar mimer, mimer achar get. Furthermore, the get achar bia umimer achar bia beget. Now this is a case where there's three actions, so therefore we're talking about three women. So instead of Shimon just having two wives, Rachel and Leah, when Shimon died, he left three: Rachel, Leah, and Sarah. And in this situation, Reuven decides to do everything except Yibum. He does bia, but he does mimer, bia, and get, everything but chalitza. So he did everything else. He did, let's say, Rachel got mimer, Leah got bia, Sarah got a get, and not necessarily in that order, as the Gemara tells us as follows: that he gave a get only after he did bia and then mimer, or he did mimer after bia and get. So it's possible that bia was not the first action, and nonetheless he says it's the other ones still have some element of validity. Now, if in fact he's not sure what the status of chalitza, of mimer and get are, then tehavi kebi l'chatchila, then we should always say that these first two actions, let's say bia was done last or in the middle, but we should say it was considered like it was done first. We shouldn't say that the bia was like a second or third, and therefore that becomes probably, as we saw in the Gemara, in the Mishnah, at the end of Nun Mud Beis, the Mishnah, there's actually machlokas. At some time, according to the Tanakama, it's necessary that the bia must be done first. Be'ila b'zman shehi b'tchila in acharei klum, be'emsa b'sof yesh acharei klum. So over here, even if bia was not the first action, but since there's a suffix whether mimer get actually mean anything, so the bia really is the first action. So therefore, no other further action should be necessary. And v'tikni da'atanan be'ila b'zman shehi b'tchila in acharei klum. So how do we understand this? If in fact he holds that mimer and get really don't mean, it's a suffix if they work, so then we shouldn't consider them the fact that they were their first actions. It's usually the first action. So good Rashi. Gegoin mimer lazu, uboy lazu, v'get l'shlishus. So Rashi says you did three different actions to these three different women. So mahani get, so the get actually will have some power, but also b'krovaseha, and he's going to be usher to her relatives as well. So the question is, why? Fine. So why? It must be because it does. It's not a suffix. El Omer Abai Oilam Shita Rabbi Gamliel beget the Dachi and Maimer the Kani. Really, Rabbi Gamliel is not Musubak. He actually holds that Maimer is an actual kinyan. It's not a suffix. It actually works, and that's why you can understand ein Maimer achar Maimer, because it actually works. So the second brother who does Maimer doesn't mean anything because the first brother who did Maimer. For that matter, get has power to already shulvo yivna, that you no longer can marry her. So therefore, once a get is given, it has validity. So the second get is no longer necessary. It doesn't mean anything. Umihu. So the question is, why the other way? How come if you gave get and mimer or mimer then get, why does that work? Miu amrabanan hayavama b'chad sad mehani boget v'chad sad mehani b'mimer. On one side, we say that mimer works to bring her in, and on the other hand, the get has some power to bring her somewhat out. But we see that they accomplish totally different things. Therefore, like this: get achar get lo dachi daha dachale kama. It makes sense that when it comes to get after get, lo dachi daha dachale kama, the first one was already pushed her off. So therefore, the second one means nothing. Umaymer achar maymer lo kani daha kani le kama, and the second mimer doesn't do anything because the first mimer did something. But they're both trying to accomplish the same thing. So since the first mimer was already done, so the same action of mimer is not going to accomplish anything because the mimer was already done and already worked. However, get achar mimer, mimer achar get, when they're two different things, high milsa kadachi, high milsa kakani. So one is trying to push her away and one is trying to bring her in. So therefore, for that reason, we say no, that when it comes to one after the other, when it comes to mimer after get or get after mimer, that actually does work. Okay. Rabbanan kol chad v'chad tekinu le Rabbanan get u'mimer b'yavama. So question is, how come according to the Rabbanan, why the Rabbanan say that the din is that there is get after get? If the get works, so how come for Reuben gave a get? So why would we say that Shimon's giving get means anything? Because he says that kol chad v'chad, each yavam, takinu li rabbanan get umaymer b'yavama. Each one has the ability to be able to give a get or do mimer to the yavama. So even though it's true his brother already gave a get, he also really had the ability to do so. And therefore the fact that he gave us a get the second time, it has enough of power that it's going to also aser Shimon to her relatives. Now, behind Bia Psula, now, if we're dealing with, as we mentioned, that a person, let's say, there was the three wives, and Reuven did, let's say, mimer, then Bia, then get. So Bia was in the middle. So this is a Bia Psula, because he already did something to bring the other one in. So therefore, this Bia doesn't really have the power to be able to marry and to do yibum. So on some level, a difum a mimer. On some level, it actually is stronger than mimer. Uguria a mimer. However, on another level, it's weaker than mimer. So what does that mean? A difum a mimer, di'ilu mimer, achar mimer lo mahani. We know, as we established, according to Rabbi Gamliel, that when you do mimer and then Shimon does mimer, it does nothing, and therefore he's allowed to marry her relatives. V'il biachar mimer mahani. However, if let's say Shimon would have done Bia with her, so in that situation, it is Mahani. It does do something. Let's just look in Rashi. Actually, before we see this, Rashi says Kol Chad V'Chad, according to the Tanakama, Min Yevamot Tiknu Rabbanan Get Umayim B'Chol Hayavamos Hilkach Leikol Mimer Kama Docha Kol Koyach Get. Again, so therefore the whole koyach of the get isn't pushed off also by mimer. Okay, now what does it mean that it's stronger? Says Rashi, adif ma mimer. Why is bia? The ilu bia achar mimer mahanya. It does something. Kediktani get achar bia umimer. So that's what we said. Alma yesh bia achar mimer. There is an element of bia achar mimer that it will aser. according to him, the relatives. However, that's how we see that mimer after mimer is not strong. However, mimer B after mimer is, because it will aser, as we just saw, as it says that get acher bio mimer. Okay, that's in the that is that case where we see that B is stronger than mimer sometimes, and yet at the same time grima mimer. Why is it sometimes weaker? However, grima mimer sometimes B is weaker than mimer. Why? Get, as we established. According to Ramila, he agrees. Kani l'kuli d'shira to get. So he said that it's kaina, whatever the get is left over. So if a person does mimer after a get, it does have validity. V'ilu bia achar get. Lo kanile l'kuli shir to get. So let's look in Rashi. Ugriya mimer. It says Rashi, kol ma shishir get, whatever's left over by the get that was given, l'ma acher ve'in mimer acher moil klum. The mimer doesn't do anything. Im chazer ve'asa mimer b'shlishis. If he does mimer the third one, k'di omer Rabbi Gamliel ein mimer acher mimer. If you did mimer, then another mimer doesn't do anything. It doesn't matter if mimer, the first mimer was after the get. Ilo, ein mimer acharav. V'lo polug ben shi mimer rishon b'tchila ben shi achar haget. V'lo katani madam gulil sheish mimer achar mimer beget. So that doesn't make any difference. However, when it comes to be after a get, lo kanya le l'kuli shir to get, says Rashi. Kol ma shishir get l'bia diyesh mimer achar bia v'get. Kedanan habi'ila b'zman batchila. This is when it comes to bia, it has to be the first action. Only then in acharei klum. Although be'emsa, if let's say bia was the middle action, niyesh acharei klum, then you actually have to do something afterwards. As we said before, my tamar rabbanan bia psula niyesh acharei klum. And the reason is because bia is l'hoitzi and chalitza is l'hoitzi, as we said, and therefore the problem is that if we would say that bia doesn't do anything, you would think the chalitza doesn't do anything either, and a person will end up doing bia after the chalitza, which is aser because it says lo yivna. Okay, weiter. Tanurban. Ketzad Rabbi Gamliel ein get acher get. So this is almost like a little bit of a relaxing recap of what we saw in the Mishnah. What does it mean that according to Ramila, that there's no get after a get? So shtei Yevamos, so you have two women, Rachel and Leah, shnaf lifnei Yavam echad, and you only have Reuven that's alive. Shimon died and you have Reuven left. But Nasan get lazu, get lazu. So Reuven first gave a get to Rachel, then he gave a get to Leah. So at that action, he now needs to do an action. He has to give a get to the first woman that he did give a get to. He needs to do chalitza to the first woman he gave a get to. And he certainly is usher to her relatives because he did chalitza with her. However, he is allowed to marry Leah's relatives. What do you mean? How is he allowed to do that? Didn't he give her a get? No, but in get acher get. That second get means nothing, and therefore he's allowed to marry relatives. However, the Chamim disagree. The Chamim doesn't get lazu, get lazu. You actually, since you did this action, you actually have to give a get lazu. If that's the case, aser b'krov, you're actually aser to both of their relatives. But chalitza l'achas mehen, and you have to do chalitza to one of them. So we see that actually, according to them, it's necessary. It's an action. It actually has validity. The fact that you gave a get to the second one enough to aser the kroivim. The same din if you're dealing with two yevamim and one yevama. So again, if instead of Rachel and Leah, it's just Rachel. But if we're talking about now Reuven, Shimon, and Levi died. So you have Reuven and Shimon in the picture. Reuven gave a get, then Shimon gave a get. Well, it's the same thing. It's a second get. It doesn't matter if the same brother gave two get in, one to Rachel, one to Leah, or Reuven and Shimon gave a get respectively to the one Yevama. The same din applies, same machlokas would apply. Question number 3. Mahai nafkamin ladina amavoras bebraisa bepukta b'rabanan yim yesh get acher get. And the answer is whether the second person who gave the get, or Ruvain who gave the get to the second woman, whether us in her relatives. Fine. So now we explain this case. So again, you have Rachel and Leah that there's only one man, Ruvain. Ruvain decided to do mimer to Rachel, and then he did mimer to Leah. So he has to give a get for the first one to remove the mimer. And this is what we said before. When you do mimer, you need to give a get to remove the mimer, but that basically just breaks her back to where she started. And you have to do chalitza just for her. Of course, you're usher now in her relatives. However, the chiddush is umutar b'krovis sheniya. That even though you did mimer with the second woman, but the second mimer means nothing, because the first mimer meant something, as we said, l'maskana kanavimila actually has a kinyan. So therefore, the second one's mimer is nothing. Chacham omrim noisin get l'shteyan. A get goes to both of them. But usher b'krovis shteyan, and you're usher to marry either of them. But chalitza lachas behen, again, obviously you only have to do chalitza to one of them. B'cheina to oimer b'shnei yavamin v'yavamachas. Again, it's the same din if we're dealing with two yavamin. If you have Reuben and Shimon that do the same thing, Reuben gives mimer and then Shimon gives mimer to the same woman. So the question is does Shimon's mimer mean anything enough that now he is going to be usher to her relatives? Omer Mar, noisin get lazu v'get lazu. So we say that you have to give a get to each one. So he said, in that case, all you need to do is do chalitza to the first one. And of course, she is usher to you. However, the chiddush, as we said, is umutar b'krova shniya. So Shmuel, this goes against what Shmuel said. What did he say? Cholotz l'balas aget. If let's say you did chalitza to the balas aget, nifter atzara. How is it possible that he says that all you need to do is chalitza to one of them? But since you did mimer, or in this case, you gave a get to both of them, so you gave a get to Rachel and get to Leah. Since you did an action to both of them, it's not enough now to just do chalitza to one of them and remove her. It's necessary. It's not going to pop to the tzara. The co-wife still, there is this action that since you engaged in her by giving her a get, so you have to do something for her too. There's still a connection. There's still a zika. So on Malach Shmuel, no, it's not a question. It's just they don't agree with the same. They don't have the same opinions. Rabbi doesn't hold there's a zika. So therefore, if he holds in zika, the zika is not so strong. So therefore, once he does chalitza with the first one, that will pot or will free up the tzara. Or if you hold yesh zika, then that would not be the case. Let's look in Rashi. The Amr Shmuel Cholzol Balas get Naful of Shtei Yevamos. Again, you have Rachel and Leah. V'nosin gelu achs mehen. You gave a get to one of them. V'acha Cholzol, and then you gave her a get. You gave her a get, and then afterwards you did chalitza. So nifter tzuras mishum de kalisha zikasa. So in that situation, this is actually not necessarily. This is not talking about a case where you gave the second one a get, actually, but you just gave the first woman a get. So therefore, it's the chalitza is a chalitza psula, because since once you can no longer do chalitza, so even though we require to do chalitza, it's considered to be a weak chalitza. So v'lo alima chalitza fukizika alimata detzarasa. So it's this week since you already gave her a get. So therefore, the first one you didn't do anything bad to, you didn't give her a get. So this is not what I said before. So the first one, you gave her a get. The second, you did nothing. So the first one, since you gave a get, so that chalitza is considered to be a chalitza psula. Because it's the only time it's a strong chalitza is if you could have done yibum, but once you gave a get, you can only do yibum. So therefore, the chalitza is considered to be a weak chalitza. So once it's considered to be a weak chalitza, so fine, that woman's free, but the original woman, there's a zika still to her. So it holds no in zika. It's not the case. If you hold in zika, then we say that once you did chalit, even a chalitza psula will pater the tzara. Okay, let's look at these questions. Question 4 and TA4 is the same question. Shtei Yevamot shenaflu lefnei Yevamot echad v'nosin get lazu v'get lazu. V'fi eza shita kliyam l'pligi im cholotz l'bal haget harishayin nifter namitzara. So if you gave Reuven gave a get to Rachel and gave a get to Leah, so according to what sheet does everyone agrees that if you did chalitza to the Baal get Rishayna, if you did chalitza to the first one, that the tsar is also pater, that you don't have to do anything else afterwards. And the answer is Loman Yemer Ein Zika, if you hold Ein Zika. So if you hold Ein Zika, even though you did a get, even if you gave a get to both of them, which is what I said before, but according to the Tiyufta was in a situation where maybe you didn't even give a get to the second one. All you did was give a get to the first one, and then you did chalitza, was chalitza psula. The question is, will that pater there too? So the question is, in general, will chalitza psula pater the tzara? Let's look at TA4. Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbanan Sabri, Ein Zika, Aman Diyam Esricha Lachser, Svirla Yesh Zika. Okay. All right. Weiter. Rabbi Gamliel Sabri, Ein Zika. Rabbi Gamliel holds Ein Zika, because he says all you need to do is give the one woman that you did the first get with chalitza, and that will pater the tzara as we continue to do Alpha and Beis. Rabbanan Sabri Yesh Zika. The Rabbanan hold, because the fact that he asked the question must be that he holds Yesh Zika. V'katani Seifa. So he said, so too when it comes to the case of two Yevamim, Reuven and Shimon, with just one woman, and again one gave a get and the second one gave a get. So Laman Tavtiti after Rabbi bar Rav Huna Amarav. Yomi Rabbi bar Rav Huna Amarav Chalitza Psula, which l'chor is this case because if you already gave a get, the chalitza is chalitza psula, tzricha laksua kol ha'achin. So you have to go after all the brothers, right? In other words, the other brothers have to do chalitza, not just one, right? So this is saying that only one needs to do chalitza. So, but according to them, who says yesh zika, everyone should have to do it because it's chalitza psula. So Amalach Rabba bar Rab Huna bein Rabbanan Sabri Ein Zika. Now the truth is that even the Rabbanan hold Ein Zika. Again, they just argue whether or not there's this din, even though the get and the mimer actually has strength, but because, again, according to the Rabbanan, as we saw in Rashi, since there is a koyach for each yavam to be able to do these things, the fact that the other brother did it first, does that completely remove that koyach away from the second brother? Omer Mar. Also mimer bezu, mimer bezu. So let's say you did mimer to Rachel, and then you did mimer to Leah. So I'm going to go mimer. Noisen get l'rishayna. So you have to remove the mimer. So by removing the mimer, you give a get to the first one, and then you do chalitza, and that completely frees her, which of course means v'as b'krov maseha, u'mota b'krov sheniya. And the second was completely free because chalitza was done. He holds ein zika, and even a chalitza psula works. And then the second one is you're allowed to, is mota even though he did mimer with her, because the second mimer means nothing. Michti. So what are we saying? We're saying there's two women, and you did mimer and then mimer. So we said, oh, you know what? You got to give the first one a get and chalitza. Well, I have another option. Michdi k'samar b'gamliel ein mimer achar mimer. The second one is like you didn't do anything. All you did was mimer. So Rishain now mitisavim. Why don't we just say let the guy do yibum? What's the problem? Let him continue the process and just do yibum. Why does he have to now do chalitza and remove her from the equation? Let him just continue to do yibum, and that would be good. So technically, you're right. technically, because ein mimer achar mimer, the second mimer means nothing. So all he did was really do one mimer. So really, he should be able to do yibum. We shouldn't require a get and then chalitza. So why do we? Because gezer dimel asi liyavumi l'shniya. Maybe he'll end up marrying the other one as well. And therefore, by doing that, that's an isser of shtei botim. And therefore, that's the reason why it's not allowed. TB6. Shtei Yevamos v'yasa maimer l'zum ma'mazul ma'adu rishon v'asul yavu l'shittas of l'il the ein maimer achar maimer v'im kein maimer shniya will aser mishum shtei botim. So what's the problem? It's because zer dim aser liyav mishniya. Because maybe he will do yibum with the second one. B'avli boinim beis botim. Once we start allowing him to do yibum, it's a little bit hard to understand why would we think this, but then maybe he'll end up doing yibum with her too. Okay. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Gamliel, Ubeis Shammai, Rabbi Shimon, Uben Azai, Rabbi Nechemia. All of these people, Kul, Sirihu Maimer Koine Kinyan Gomer. They all hold that when you do Maimer, it is considered to be a Kinyan Gomer. Rashi says, Lul Gomer Mamish, El Kinyan Choshev. It actually has some meaning, has some power. Rabbi Gamliel had the Amran. Rabbi Gamliel, we certainly already explained in our parak. Maimer is so strong that it connects her, and therefore the second brother who does Maimer, it means nothing. Beis Shammai, how do we say Beis Shammai? Titnan. Shloish Achen. Let's say you have three brothers, Reuben, Shimon, and Levi. Shnai mehen nesuin l'shtei achayos. Reuben and Shimon were married to Rachel and Leah, respectively. Ve'echad mufna. And then you have Levi, who is not married. Meis echad mebali chayos. So let's say Reuven, who is married to one of the sisters, dies. Now, obviously, Shimon cannot do yibum with her because Shimon is married to her sister. We also bought mufna maimer. So instead of Levi, who is not married to anyone, he could have done yibum to the sister, but instead he decided just to do maimer with Rachel. And now all of a sudden the second brother dies. So now the problem is this guy has one sister that he married. He didn't do marry completely. He only did maimer. And now you have his other brother died. So Levi is the only brother, and he has this other sister who is Zokuk. So what's the din? Because certainly, if he was married to Rachel, it would be nothing to talk about. Leah, is obviously going to be potter. But in this situation, he only did maimer. So we say like this. So Beis Shammai oimrim ishto imo. So this is like his wife. And therefore, the second woman, who is now a widow, she can go because it's his wife's sister. He has no, because maimer was strong enough to do that. Okay, so that's the shita Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai holds that the fact that he was strong enough, maimer so strong that she's completely free. Says Rashi, she's free af min hachalitza. She doesn't have to do anything, because since Levi did maimer with her sister, that's enough of a connection. It's like almost they're married, so strong. So therefore, because of that, the other sister's free completely. Who's Rav Shimon? How do we see Rav Shimon? Desanya. Amul Rav Shimon Chachamim. So Rav Shimon said to Chachamim, Im bias rishon bia. If the first bia is a bia sheni ain't a bia, then the second one isn't. Im bias rishon ain't a bia. If the first one isn't, then bia sheni nami ain't a bia. So according to Rav Shimon, he's establishing and speaking that no mamonashach, the second bia is nothing. What is this referring to? On this we need Rashi. Rashi says later on in Perek Isha Rabbah, Ben Teisha Shanim V'Yom Echad. Let's say you have a boy who's 9 years old, Haba Al Yevimtai, and he has Tashmish with a Yevamot. V'Chazur Ba Achiv Ben Teisha Shanim V'Yom Echad Oleha Psul Al Yadai. And then you have his brother who is 9 years old, and he has bia. So psul al yadai. So he passes. The bias ben teisha shanim kimaimer shavir rabbanan. He says that the din of bia of a 9-year-old has the same status as maimer. V'havi le maimer acher maimer. So he says that it's considered like the same din of mimer achar mimer. So just like the same svar as we said about Rabbi Gamliel, why the second mimer means nothing, so too this second bia by a 9-year-old doesn't do anything either. Fine. So that's as far. Says Rashi. If the first one means something, then the second one is obviously nothing. And then that's the whole idea. If the second one is nothing, then obviously if the first bia is nothing, then obviously the second one, which is the same action, also doesn't mean anything. Okay. So, and therefore he said it's similar to the notion of mimer. Whereas bias ben teisha is the mimer shever rabbanon. It's comparable like to mimer. Become Rav Shimon in bia. So therefore he says that it's not considered to be a bia, the second one. Okay. So again, must be because the first one it is actually something strong. Because mimer has power to be able to remove the second bia or the second mimer. This bia of a 9-year-old is considered like mimer. Okay. Ben Azai, the Sani Ben Azai, Omer Yesh mimer achar mimer. He actually holds, seemingly unlike Rabbi Gamliel, but rather like the shita of the Tanakama, the Chachamim that say, rather not Tanakama, the Chachamim that say that there is mimer achar mimer. B'shnei Yevamim v'Yevam achas. In the event, Davka, if there's 2 Yevamim, Reuven and Shimon, and only 1 woman. So if we're dealing with only 1 woman and Reuven did mimer, then Shimon did mimer, in that situation he says that second mimer means something. However, in mimer achar mimer, b'shtei yevamos v'yavam echad. He holds that it does not work if we're dealing with the same brother doing mimer to 2 different women. Fine. Ve'in mimer achar mimer, b'shtei yevamos v'yavam echad. So at least he agrees in the situation where you have 1 brother that does mimer to 2 of them, so the din is that the second mimer means nothing. Says Rashi, v'kaimer Rav Shimon biasheni ben Azai rather. Okay, weiter. Nechemia oimer. How do we see when Nechemia holds the strength of mimer? Denan Nechemia oimer achas be'ilu of achas chalitza. When it comes to bia or chalitza, bein b'chila, bein be'emsa, bein b'saif, whether it's the first, second, middle, or last action, in acharei klum, you don't have to do anything else afterwards. Now, b'ha bia psula, when we're talking about a bia psula, which again doesn't have the capacity to actually do anything if you already did something to remove her, so the bia rishayna, the bia doesn't have the capacity to be able to do yibum. That's k'maimer shabi rabbanan. That has the same strength as like a mimer. It says you don't have to do anything afterwards. So just like this bia psula, you don't have to do anything afterwards. So too, when it comes to mimer obviously has an element of strength. So we see by all these different opinions the power that mimer has. Ad kan.